If you've been following the sport closely, you've probably noticed someone pretty major missing from the start list. Jim Walmsley.
That's the big thing. For so many people, Jim Walmsley is Western States. He's such an icon. And him not being there this year, it actually gives us a pretty unique chance.
A chance how?
Well, we can go beyond just the race results. We can really dive into the mind of this guy, unpack his journey, his unconventional strategies, his very data-driven training, and just his really unfiltered thoughts on ultra running. Think of it like getting practical insights straight from Jim himself. We're talking race tactics, cooling strategies, injury recovery.
And just what it really takes to compete at that level. It's basically a deep dive into the lessons learned from one of the very best. So let's start right there with this unexpected absence. Given all the hype for Western States, why isn't Jim Walmsley on the line this year? What's the core reason?
It really boils down to a knee injury, specifically tendonitis, and it's been persistent.
Ah, okay. Not something new then.
No, not at all. It actually started right after Western States last year, 2023. Then UTMB aggravated it, and then the Chianti race late last year pushed it further.
Chianti. Isn't that a huge win for him?
It was. He called it one of his greatest performances, actually. But he also said it knocked him back health-wise, so a tough trade-off.
That's just brutal, the reality of the sport, I guess. So what did the healing process look like? What did he have to do?
Well, first he tried a cortisone shot back in early April. He was pretty blunt, said it did nothing, really.
Right, not uncommon.
So that led him to get a PRP injection, platelet-rich plasma, in early May. But that wasn't any kind of quick fix. It meant, in his words, a full hard reset.
A full hard reset. What does that mean for someone like Jim?
It meant 2 weeks of absolutely nothing. No bike, no lifting, no running. Zero. Exactly. And then the build back, he described it as, gradual and painful.
Gradual.
Like after those 2 weeks off, he started with just 5 miles the next week, then 20, then 40 miles the week after that. He's still very much in that phase, just carefully seeing how the knee responds, stretching its elasticity.
And the mental side of that. We always talk physical injury, but the head game must be tough.
He was really open about that. Said an initial doctor told him to just push through the pain.
Uh-oh.
Which made running very much not fun, and he said it caused him to sort of unravel mentally. Imagine that long build from November through Chianti, only for the injury to flare right back up. It's got to be incredibly frustrating.
Absolutely. So, for you listening, what's the big takeaway from Jim's experience here? The practical lesson.
I think the crucial thing is prioritizing that long-term health. Jim specifically said he chose not to push through this time because he'd rather have small, healthy runs than a summer of not running again.
Which is what happened after UTMB last year, right?
Exactly. So it's a powerful lesson, Sometimes the smartest thing for your long-term enjoyment and success is just hitting that reset button.
Makes total sense. Okay, so beyond the injury itself, this naturally leads us into his whole approach to Western States. And this is where he really gives like a master class in doing things differently. And maybe nothing is more direct or controversial than his view on pacers.
He's incredibly strong on this and very vocal. He believes elite runners, for what he calls pure competition, just shouldn't have pacers.
He calls them a crutch, doesn't he?
He does. He even goes so far as to say elites who use pacers shouldn't count in the top 10. And points out he hasn't used them in his 4 wins there.
And he mentioned that 2023 race being 2-on-1 against Rod and his pacer. That really cemented it for him.
He felt like a pacer gives you a mental refill, basically. And when he was running solo near someone with a pacer, he just preferred it to be one-on-one. He also raised this kind of integrity point.
About them being unsupervised.
Exactly. That lack of supervision leads to a lack of trust. In his view, it's a firmly held belief for him, rooted in this idea of pure competition.
It's definitely a hot topic. You can see his point on integrity, but I imagine many elites rely on pacers for support, hydration.
Safety too on tough sections. While Jim's point is clear, there are definitely strong arguments for their practical benefits and how they let athletes push limits safely. Lots of debate there.
Fascinating stuff. But okay, pacer stance aside, it's undeniable that Jim knows the Western States course like the back of his hand.
He calls it his home turf, a place he knows how to survive in the canyons, and he says he can exploit other runners because it suits his strength so well, and he's developed some really unique, very practical cooling strategies.
Love this stuff. Did he share any specifics? Like secret tactics?
He talked about having a secret spot to dip in the American River before the main Rucky-Chucky crossing. Though he did admit that in 2023 it actually backfired a bit. He said it was a net negative because Rod gained time on him while he was getting wet. He's a huge advocate for fully dunking in Duncan Creek because that climb up to Robinson Flat right after is so exposed and hot.
Right.
And he even recommended the Volcano Canyon Creek dip to other runners, like Rod, plus El Dorado Creek, another key spot he uses, even though it's a bit of a scramble down.
So it's not just fitness, it's about knowing the environment, applying that knowledge. Those cooling dips sound absolutely crucial in the heat.
Precisely. It's strategic. Jim's detailed knowledge and willingness to use these, slightly unconventional tactics, that's a massive part of why he's so consistent. For you listening, it's a reminder. Really understanding the environment can be a game changer, especially when it's hot. Mid-race cooling is vital.
Definitely. Now, despite all these wins, Jim's surprisingly honest about how he sees his own performances. He called his 2023 win quite sloppy, which really grabbed my attention.
He backs it up with data, which is very Jim. He had 33 minutes of stopping time at aid stations. Compare that to Dan, Hayden, Rod. They were all under 13 minutes.
That's a big difference. Any idea why? What caused the sloppiness?
He thinks he got debris on his feet right at the start, like from walking around barefoot that morning before putting socks and shoes on.
Oh, man.
Created a hot spot early, forced him to kind of manage it, sacrifice perfect execution. But here's the really interesting part. Even with that, he said he ran purely by feel. Wasn't watching splits at all. He only found out he was just 2 minutes off the course record when someone told him at No Hands Bridge. It was a total surprise to him.
That's incredible. It just shows even the best laid plans can go wrong, right? And sometimes running by feel, listening to your body, that's what gets you there. Adaptability is everything.
Absolutely. A perfect example of having to pivot and trust your instincts, even at the very top.
And speaking of tactics, let's break down that move on Devil's Thumb in 2023. That climb is steep, like 22% average gradient, with tons of switchbacks.
38 or 39 switchbacks. And he specifically used that climb as an attack weapon.
Yeah, so.
He wanted to split up the chasers, Hayden and Dan. He actually let them pass him at the bottom, then used the steepness. He says anything over 15% gradient gets interesting. It pushes people to their absolute physiological max to make his move.
So leveraging the terrain and knowing those thresholds, smart, even though Rod managed to claw back on the descents later.
Right. Rod's descending is exceptional. But Jim's ability to use those climbs to break the field apart, that shows a really sharp tactical mind. He thinks Killian has that same knack for steep climbs, seeing them as opportunities.
It's clear Jim isn't just running on talent. He's thinking constantly. And he's incredibly data-driven. Let's talk about the tech side. His use of the Wahoo treadmill, especially in winter and during recovery. What's the appeal there?
He loves it because, as he put it, he can truly control everything. Speed, gradient. He mentioned the paddle shifting like in a car, which he likes. Plus, it's heavy and stable. It just gives him this perfectly controlled environment for specific training blocks.
Especially useful during injury recovery, I bet.
Exactly. But he did mention Zwift integration. Some limitations there for trail running.
What was that?
He basically said Zwift needs real trail simulations, steeper ups and downs to really unlock the treadmill's potential for trail runners. He called the idea a dangerous amount of fun if they could actually do it. Shows how he's always thinking about optimizing tech for training.
And his data focus goes way beyond the treadmill. He keeps a big Excel spreadsheet for tracking grade-adjusted pace.
At Flagstaff's altitude, 7,000 feet. Grade-adjusted pace, for anyone unfamiliar, basically levels the playing field. It adjusts your speed to reflect the effort of climbing or descending. So a slower uphill pace might equal the same effort as a faster flat pace. And he detailed his threshold training too, like 30 minutes of work, random intervals, usually aiming for 8 to 12-minute intervals, sometimes double T days, just doing 2 threshold sessions in a day to boost volume.
That's intense. And this systematic approach, it showed up in his first ever lactate testing too, right? Back in Feb 2025 at ASU.
He said his numbers look good. Based on the data, he even theorized he could run a sub-62-minute half marathon.
Wow.
He was so into it, he actually bought his own lactate meter afterwards. It really highlights how deep he goes into the physiology, trying to quantify and optimize everything.
And looking forward, he mentioned TimeWare, the heart rate strap, seeing that as a potential breakthrough.
Yeah, briefly. He sees potential there for real-time physiological data, maybe revolutionizing things like some cycling teams are apparently trying.
But, for all this tech and data, there's still a very human side. He went Strava dark. He talked about why.
Yeah, he was quite open about that.
It was the reason.
He said it was down to the injury, the uncertainty, self-doubt even. He talked about dealing with nerves, feeling socially isolated during recovery.
That's really relatable, actually.
Totally. He emphasized, he didn't get into ultra running to train alone on a treadmill. It was social. So for him, enjoying the sport long-term matters more than constant pressure. Going dark, getting some privacy, that was a tool for recovery. It shows even elites battle major mental hurdles when they're sidelined.
It's such a crucial reminder. The mental game is just as important. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. How does Jim actually define greatness in this sport? And what's his outlook for Western States 2024? He apparently has his own GOAT scale.
Yeah, he does. It's pretty interesting. He breaks it down. 1 or 2 Western States or UTMB wins, you're a champion. 3 wins makes you great. 5 wins, you're an all-time great.
And Jim's at 5 now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Puts him level with Killian ahead of Dehane in that specific count. Then 10-plus wins, that's GOAT status. He mentioned Scott Jurek with 7, Carl Meltzer with 14 at Hard Rock.
He had to take on races like Comrades.
Yeah, he felt they weren't quite at the global forefront compared to Western States or UTMB in terms of, I guess, defining the peaking of the sport right now.
Interesting perspective. And going back to his own races, he called Chianti 2023 one of his greatest performances.
Yeah.
High ITRA score, right? Highest ever for an ultra or something.
An incredibly high ITRA score, reflecting the difficulty in his performance. He described the conditions vividly: pissing rain, chewed up forest trails, super technical.
A huge win, beating Killian and Bonsan.
Massive win. But like we said, it came at a cost. It knocked him back physically. Kind of a double-edged sword, that one.
Definitely sounds like it. So turning to this year's Western States 2024, did Jim offer any predictions? Or at least point to the runners he sees as top contenders? I know he won't pick one winner.
Right. Refused to pick one because of friendships.
Yeah.
But yeah, he definitely laid out who he sees as the key players for the men. The top guys back from last year: Rod, Dan, Caleb. He noted Dan and Caleb have had strong starts to 2024. Adam Peterman, the 22 winner. Jim's logic: if you've won before, you're more likely to win again. Makes sense. Killian, obviously, multiple UTMB wins, super adaptable, can't ignore him.
And experience is key.
Huge. He stressed that. Thinks newcomers like David Roche, Hans Troyer, Dan Green, they face a really tough learning curve on that specific course.
Okay. And what about the women's race? Who did he highlight there?
He mentioned Pooja, said she had a phenomenal run last year and often flies under the radar. Esther, too. Marianne Hogan, coming back from a long recovery. And Riley noted her speed and said he's curious about her shoe choice, marathon versus trail shoe.
Lots of factors at play. But maybe the boldest thing he said was that he thinks a course record is unlikely this year. Why so sure?
It was pretty quantitative. He basically said people need to find 30 minutes to run faster for a record to even be in the discussion. Rod, for instance, needs to shave off 14 minutes from his time.
And Jim knows what that takes.
He claims his own proprietary GPX files. This GPS data show his moving time was well under 14 hours when he set the record, implying he understands precisely the effort needed.
So it's a huge ask. What else did he say is crucial for this race?
Temperature. He thinks it's a massive factor. Said the official Auburn temp, maybe 89F average, doesn't tell the whole story. It feels way hotter on course.
Like microclimates?
Exactly. He mentioned 2015 Forest Hill hit 95F when Auburn officially read 89F. That difference is enormous when you're running 100 miles.
So his ultimate advice for running Western States is just practical wisdom.
Pretty much. Take what the course gives you. That was his core advice. Don't force it. Adapt to the heat pockets, the humidity changes. Acknowledge how much the weather can shift. It's a race of patience, of response, not just brute force.
Great advice. And finally, he touched on the recent rule changes about aid and accompaniment, like no support runners from Bath Road to Forest Hill.